Oh, let's see. I wonder if I hopefully the thing is correct. Okay, take out a piece of paper. Turn it long ways. And across the top, write these site names. Oh, for those of you taking notes on your laptops, I realize this is a complication. All right, then. You are taking out a piece of paper, you are turning it long ways, and you are writing these site names across the top. With me? Now, down the side, put some dates. You're going to love me for this. Now listen here, folks. The way you have to think about all the stuff we do in this class, the way you have to think about archaeology is like this. You have to organize the stuff. If you don't organize the stuff, you can't do anything with it. It's just a pile of things. We don't dig just to find things, and I don't teach just to tell you about stuff we found. Archaeology is a petri dish for us. It's the petri dish for studying human society, culture, economy, how we got to be the way we are, what's important to us, how we organize ourselves. So all the material is what we use to help us define that, but we can't do anything with it until we categorize it. That's why when I ask you in questions for aspects or characteristics or categories, it's because you have to take one step back from the stuff and start to put it in order. From some places we have graves, and from some places we have buildings, and from some places we have some kinds of finds, and from some places we have other kinds of finds. And that's just kind of a coincidence, usually. It's just a coincidence. We happen to have this or we happen to have that. In and of itself, that's not meaningful. What's meaningful is that from whatever it is we find, there are various things that we deduce about the people who left those remains. And what we want to be able to do is compare the people. It's the people that we're focused on. So, in order to do that, we've got to get the stuff in order so that when we compare the people, we are comparing apples with apples. So, in this box, what would you write? What do you have from Lefkandi into 10th century BC? You, in the red, in the back. What? Yes, hi. Tumba. Right, so you want to write Tumba in that spot. What about from the 10th, the 9th, and the 8th centuries? What do we have from Lefkandi? We have the Tumba Mound. What else? What else? Tombs 1 and 3. What else? Mr. Tie-Dye Shirt. Well, that's how we know that it's this date. The centaur. What about this century and this century? What else do we have? What do we have? Break my heart, you folks. What? What do we have? Duh! Ah! This cannot be happening soon enough. You people. You've got to be on the edges of your seats. You've got to be paying closer attention. What do we have from the rest of the century? Somebody back there? From the 9th, from the 8th. Tomb 80. What's the date?
9th century.
8th. Okay, so we've got a cemetery. What was it about Tomb 80? What was in Tomb 80? What was in Tomb 80? One lone apology. I'm sorry. I can't remember. Oh, that was so long ago. It was a little while ago. Tomb 80. I am not telling you. You are telling me. Get with it. Look it up. Come on. Jewelry. Cooking vessels. Drinking cups. Jars. A few. A lot. Many. So Tomb 80 is of somebody who's pretty rich. In fact, Lefkandi is a pretty rich site. It's rich from the beginning to the end. We don't have the site, but we have the graves. So we know two things about Lefkandi, the settlement, the people who are buried at the Tumba Cemetery. We know, one, that they were pretty well off. It was a pretty well off society. And we know something else very interesting. The burial in the Tumba Harawan does very much conform to the story from Iliad 23. And that is very interesting in and of itself and suggests, well, it indicates a close connection. And it's somewhat of a chicken and egg thing. We had some people here who think that the story needs to come before the burial, and some people who think the other way around. And I will leave that to you to decide. But anyway, we know that the story is still oral poetry at that time, so the story is out and about in the 10th century, let's say. We know that. What is something that this society has in common with Mycenaean society in terms of wealth? Well, who's honored in Tomb 80? What do do we do this today? You going to be buried with your flat screen TV and your, I don't know, what's the most important thing to you? Your iPod and whatever, your extremely excellent collection of historic LPs, and all the other things that show that you were a class act and a person who had a lot of stuff. Going to do that? Do we do this?
No, but people who have more money buy more expensive grade, like more expensive. Like, you can like tell how wealthy someone was by like the coffin.
You can tell how wealthy somebody is by their coffin until it's down in the ground. Then you can't tell anymore. And inside that coffin, generally speaking, maybe there would be a piece of jewelry or two. But you're not going to find jars and scads of jewelry and 100 cooking pots and so on and so on and so on. This is a community of people who keep their wealth close and with them even into death. That's like the Mycenaeans. The wealth of the community is individual wealth, and it stays with those individuals. Now that's something that you can deduce about the society of Lefkandi from the finds. And you can deduce that it's the same in the 10th century and the 8th century. Because in the 8th century, we've got Tomb 80, which had all that stuff in it, very, very wealthy. Now, it's true that it's a different kind of burial than Tumba. It's not grandiose, it's not built up, so on and so forth. That difference suggests other differences in the society, but fundamentally it's a wealthy society. The wealth goes with the individuals. Then there are other changes based on the kinds of changes that we see from Tumba itself to the cemetery that grows up around it. What are you going to write under Nicoria? Way back there in the gold sweatshirt, what are you going to write under Nicoria? Just because you are not looking at me, I am looking at you. Talk to me. My kids used to do this. I don't hear you. Are you working on it? Talk to somebody near you. What am I supposed to say? Help him out. Somebody back there. Put this poor guy out of his misery. What are we writing under Nicoria? Thank you. Unit 4.1. And what century am I writing it in? Help him out. Help him out. Come on, you folks. Band together back there. I could be picking on any of you. Can't hear you. 10th century? 10th century? Nicoria? There's no comparing anything unless you know when something dates to. That's the very first thing you want to know about something. And you want to get it right. What do you think, Mr. Water Bottle?
Actually, I'm not totally sure. I checked through my notes on what century.
So here's a clue, folks. When you write things down, is one of the first things that you are going to want to know. Oh, she didn't tell me what the date is, but I need to know. I better raise my hand. Anybody write this down? Get out of here. Nobody wrote this down? Oh, but it was written on the screen.
You said it was during the Dark Ages, that's all I.
Oh, you guys are pathetic. Oh, Lordy. Get a grip, people. All right, probably the 9th and the 8th centuries. Now, we had a lot of discussion about this site, and we will have a little more discussion today as we compare it with Athens and then with Zagora, and in a perfect world, we'll get to Ephesus. So we will not go through more discussion now. Now, this chart that you've got, here's what you do with this. Number one, you keep it in your head so that when you're taking notes in class, you're thinking, what do I need to know to be able to start linking up the remains from this place with the remains from another place? And at some point after class, but before too long a time has passed, you fill in some of the additional information here from your notes. You keep up with the progression of history that we are investigating in this class via material remains. That is how you're going to keep it straight. That is how you are going to have what you need to know to answer the questions, and that is what you need to do well in this class. Questions? Sir?
Actually, I've just got a question about the expansion of Unit 4.1. Exactly when did that happen?
Exactly when did that happen? Of course, because the evidence for the dating there is ceramic, and because the ceramics in Messenia in the Dark Ages are pretty minimally decorated, and it is decoration and its development that allows us to assess the passage of time and provide dates. It's a little hazy. The excavators there believe that essentially phase 1 is the 9th century, some part of the 9th century, probably not it in its entirety, but in the 9th century. And phase 2 is in the later 9th to around the middle of the 8th. Nicoria looks to have been abandoned sometime in the 8th century. In other words, it's a settlement, it's a society that doesn't really work. Or other societies work so much better that people eventually vacate Nicoria. It doesn't change, it just dies off. That's very interesting. You'll want to keep that in mind when we're thinking about how we're comparing all these sites. All right. So we have been in Athens, yeah? What do we have from Athens in the 10th century? In fact, what do we have from Athens from the 10th, the 9th, and the 8th century? What is the category of evidence we have? People in the back. You with the striped shirt. Burials. Thank you very much. Excellent. Yes, burials. Burials is the only category we have. Yes?
Well, I was going to say the 8th century has the cremations that are marked with the pots happening.
Yes, that is true. That in the 8th century, we get the cremations that are marked with the big pots. You're just like a setup person for me. That was excellent. But in the 10th and the 9th centuries and the 8th centuries, what we have are burials. That is, we don't have houses. There must have been houses. Obviously, there were people living here, people dying here, people going to a lot of trouble of burying people. We just don't have any excavated. Athens, like many cities in the classical world, was continuously inhabited for millennia. It was continuously inhabited since before the Mycenaean era, and people lived pretty much in the same areas that they live now. So We're very lucky to have any of the remains that we have. That's why you need these, to think about this stuff in charts. It's just a coincidence that we don't happen to have houses. They had them. We haven't found them. It doesn't mean that you can't compare Athens and Zagora. It doesn't mean that you can't say, how was this society constituted, how was that society constituted, and compare them, even though from one we've got houses in a village, and the other we have graves. But we can isolate what each of those different sorts of remains tell us about how the people lived. All right, so in the 10th and the 9th centuries, yes?
They had cis graves with like metal and pots in the 10th century.
Yes, they did. And so what does that tell you?
That was well.
Yes, that most of the graves by the 9th century have metal in them. So relatively speaking, most of the graves are of wealthy people, either because the settlement as a whole was getting wealthier or because proper burial was reserved or largely catered to people who had more money. And some of those people were fabulously wealthy. So you remember the grave, the warrior grave, the cremation burial with the sword around the neck, and you remember the grave of the woman with that wacky pyxis, which we're going to get to in just a second here, and the jewelry, those earrings, those fabuloso earrings with little dangly pomegranates on the bottom, so cool. All right. Yes?
I have a question. Referring to the questions that when you're asking for art, would things like jewelry be considered art, or did you want things more like pictorials and like the meanings on top?
That's a good question. The question is on the question set when I ask about art, am I asking about figural decoration on pottery only, or am I also asking about jewelry? What's the answer to that question? I don't know. Does somebody have a copy of the question set? I have to look at it and see what I wrote. Brilliant. I wrote 2 individual artistic objects from 2 different sites, including material, subject, and style, as well as the context. I don't think jewelry. I think I would call jewelry craft. Art in this period will be something that is figural in some way or another. It doesn't necessarily have to be painting. You'll see another example of something that's not painting in a moment. Thanks. Good question. All right. What happens in the 8th century now? So what's the difference in the 8th century? In Athens, what's the difference in the 8th century? So we've got a lot of graves. We've got wealthy graves. Same. What's different? I'm going to pick on somebody in the back. I'm very, very gratified that you people are paying attention. Yes? Markers, and what sort of markers? What's the point of the markers? They're very, very large. Here's person, here's the pot, very large. They stick up out of the ground. And they have some kind of picture on them. A very special kind of picture. The burial pots have pictures of funeral processions, biers, B-I-E-R-S, which is the couch-like thing that the body is carried out on and then will be set on fire. So it will be turned into a pyre, P-Y-R-E, by being set on fire. And here you see two of these examples. They're both called dipylon crater. This kind of vessel is a crater. Dipylon amphora. This kind of vessel is an amphora. Because they come from a specific cemetery in Athens that's called the Dipylon Cemetery. So that's their name, Dipylon crater and Dipylon amphora. And they depict these these special scenes. And we talked about these last time. So, elements of a wealthy burial in Athens in the 8th century. Let's list them. Start. Elements of a wealthy burial in Athens in the 8th century. You're looking at the evidence on the screen. Tell me something. Elements of a wealthy burial ceremony. A wealthy burial ceremony. There were a lot of people at it. Something else. Burial shrouds. Something else.
Oh, family members being there?
Family members being there. Something else. Somebody talking about it. Something else. Cremation. Something else. Procession. Something else.
Sometimes there's animals depicted by the pyre.
Sometimes there's animals depicted by the pyre, perhaps for sacrifice. And others of the animals that are depicted are part of the procession. Who comprises the procession? Who comprises the procession? You. Hmm? Who's in it? Family. Who else? Priest who's ever talking. Who else? Person next to you. Animals. Who else? Yeah, the dead person. Thank you very much. Can't forget the dead person. Who else? Mourners. Who else? Children. Who else? Oops. That's why I put this thing down, so that I don't do that. Who else? You don't see them on this particular set of drawings, but who else? Who are these people?
Soldiers.
Warriors. Yeah, maybe they're soldiers. Soldiers, warriors. So it's a big, big deal. A burial ceremony is a big, big deal. How many of these elements are similar to the burial ceremony that we know from the story in the Iliad? I hope you were making a list. If you were writing all those down. That was excellent bunch of information that was just passed out. Things that from that list that are the same as in the Iliad. Warriors. Something else.
The animals.
Animals. Something else. The feast. Well, we don't actually have any evidence for that here. Maybe it existed, but we don't. Sorry. Something else. The pyre. Something else.
Sacrifice.
Sacrifice. Something else way in the back. Did you? Nope. Oh, sacrifice. That would have been very good. Sorry, I didn't get to you first. Something else.
A lot of people there.
A lot of people. What? So, got something else? The shroud. Very good. There's a speech given. Nice. Was that what you were going to say? Excellent. What's different? Things that are different. Things that aren't there, at least so far as we can tell. There are family members here. Well, a procession. I think we can assume there, well, it sounds like there was a procession because there's a point where Achilles calls all the Myrmidons, come all you Myrmidons, and gather around and, you know, with your horses and so forth, and everybody sort of processes up to the pyre. Now, it doesn't necessarily sound like a parade the way it looks on the pot. On the other hand, the artist doesn't have much choice about how to portray a gathering of people. He has to make them go in a line that makes it sort of look like a parade. But I think the idea that we've got a lot of attendance is the same.
This one doesn't show funeral games.
Doesn't show funeral games. That was yours. All right. So there are some things that are similar in these upper class burials, all of a sudden, in other words, all of a sudden, in the 8th century, we don't have evidence for this before in Athens. We just have evidence now in the 8th century. You are, of course, thinking about your little chart right now. You're thinking, oh, I'm going to write that in. 8th century. That just shows up in the 8th century. It didn't show up in the 10th and the 9th. That must be important. I better write that down. These are some of the sorts of vessels that are found in graves in Athens in the 10th and the 9th and the 8th century. It's a certain kind of pot, ancient pot, that's called in Greek a pyxis. If you've got a bunch, you have pyxides. Pyxides. You know, I think that the resolution thing is wrong. Well, it's not taking up as much of the screen. Just hold on a second. I just need to fix this. We are in Nicholson 275, 1280 to 768. Oh, no, it's right. Nicholson 275. All right, never mind. It's just me. Okay. All right, so these kinds of little vessels are called pyxides. They occur frequently in graves from early geometric through middle, through late geometric. This cute little number with all the little swirlies on it happens to be late geometric. So as you can see, they are, with the exception of the fact that they have painted decoration, they are basically an ordinary little covered box. But there are, in a couple of cases, different sorts of pyxides. My point here is that the pyxis is a general shape, but in the 8th century, we start to get these sorts of pyxides, and for obvious reasons they are called horse pyxides, because the handle, instead of being some little knob, is a tiny little horse figure. Could be a single horse figure, could be a whole squad, a whole, what we would call a quadruped, 4 horses together, and or 3. And you see a bunch of these. Now, maybe that's just a coincidence. Maybe the horse, which was clearly an important animal, we see it depicted on many of the large funerary vases. Somebody thought, oh, I'm going to make a handle that looks like a horse. That's going to be really cute. People are going to like that. And maybe that's so. But maybe we can suggest that it means something else. This, my friends, is the heart of archaeological deduction. You say, well, does this mean something? Does this mean something more? What might it mean? Well, you remember this strange pyxis with these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 silo-like knobs on the top. So it's called the granary pyxis. And that comes from that wealthy woman's burial from the 9th century BCE. These two kinds of pyxides, these special kinds of pyxides, are peculiar because the great majority of pyxides are just your average little box with a handle on it. Now, as it happens, we know from later literary evidence in the 6th century BCE, when we start to get evidence like this, that there are various classes, social classes, in Athenian society. The first class has my all-time favorite Greek word, pentakosiomedimnos. I love that word. Pentacosiomedimnoi are the people who own enough land that they can produce 500 medimnoi, which is about 730 bushels of wheat every year. That's a significant amount of land. And they are the highest class of people. And the class of people below the Pentacosiomedimnoi are the hippes, who are the cavalry. Those are the people who have enough money, land and money, that they can provide a full suit of armor, chariot, and pair of horses for the cavalry, for the Athenian army. And there are many people, including John Kemp, who wrote the book, The Athenian Agora, from which you have an excerpt in your course pack, who believe that the granary pyxis from the 9th century and the horse pyxides from the 8th century are beacons, little bulbs of light that we may use as evidence to suggest that these social classes already existed. It's noteworthy that this granary pyxis, which had to have been produced all by itself on its own special order, has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as if each of these was designed to represent 100 medimnoi. That's just a measure, a menipnosis measure. And so what this suggests is that beginning in the 9th century in Athens, a quite distinct set of social classes was evolving. There were all sorts of fabulous things found in the graves in geometric Athens, including this ivory figurine who is 24 centimeters high, so she's about this high. And she is actually one of 5 that came from a single grave. One of 5 that came from a single grave. And like the fabulous pomegranate bangle earrings that came from the wealthy woman's grave of the 9th century, the know-how, the material, and the style of this figure, just like the know-how, the material, and the style of these earrings, come from the East, from the area of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. And last time I showed you examples from the site of Nimrud, which is here in modern-day Kurdistan, that were very similar to the earrings, and also, I forgot I was going to, and there's Nimrud. And also from Nimrud, there's been a cache found of ivories, 8th century ivories. You see how I put these dates on the slide so that you don't have to ask, and I don't have to remember to tell you every single time, but you can write it down because you're thinking, what's the date? Because you have that chart. Yes?
They're both from there?
Yeah. Yes, they and many others like them. Fabulous things, fabulous ivories. She is part of a furniture support. She is part of a chair leg. And she's double. This is not some sort of weird myopia that you are, or double vision thing that you are experiencing. This is 2 figures back to back. That's how she's carved. Anyway, you can see very clearly all sorts of similarities. The material, the subject, the headdress, the fact that she's nude, the style of the face with the overlarge eyes and the big arched eyebrows, lots and lots of things that are similar. And that, in addition to the fact that the 5 ivory girls from the grave in Athens are, except for being like one another, are unique That is, there's no evidence that anybody in Athens knew how to do anything like this. This is clearly some special good that was acquired from abroad. Allows us to speculate that the person who got their hands on these ivory figurines may have been a person with merchant connections, or anyway with enough wealth that he or she could have purchased these from some itinerant trader on the market. From the 8th century, from another grave in Athens, from the Dipylon cemetery, comes this jug. A jug in Greek is very frequently called an oinakoi, which means a wine pouring thing. So that complicated word just means jug. You can call this the Dipylon jug. That's really okay with me. But you will see references to it in your reading as the Dipylon oinakoi. And I don't want you to be confused or think there's more than one. There's just one thing like this. Standard late geometric decoration, a tiny little figured scene in a panel on the neck, a lot of boring geometric bands and a little bit of diamond or elongated triangle shapes. And then this remarkable bit of writing on the shoulder. Writing that we can read because it's Greek and we know how to read Greek. And because we can read it, we can translate it. And this is what it says. For he who dances most gaily. And these words are in meter. They are in the meter of the Homeric epics, which is iambic pentameter. What is this? What is this? What could it be from? What could it be from? You. What might this commemorate? What was one of the things that we didn't see as a similarity between Iliad 23 and, yes? Funeral games. Is that true? It looks like a prize, like a trophy. Now, what do you make of these many similarities that just show up now in Athens in the 8th century between many of the characteristics of an illustrious heroic funeral, as recounted in Iliad 23, and upper class funerals in Athens right now? What's going on? Coincidence? Is this a coincidence? No. The answer is no. It's not a coincidence. I will forestall that as a response. So, what's going on? We had lots of similarities at Tumba in the 10th century, and then no more after that. None of the graves after that reflect that kind of awareness. We have no indication from the 10th and the 9th centuries in Athens that people are saying, oh, this is like a script, Iliad 23, this awesome story about the funeral and funeral games of Patroclus put on by Achilles. Fantastic. Let's all do this. No evidence for that whatsoever. Not in the 10th, not in the 9th. Now, some elements of that showing up in the 8th. What's going on? It doesn't make any people. So one answer is that people are starting to learn how to write. But what's the response to that? Why is it doesn't matter if people are learning how to write? Why does it not matter if people are learning how to write? You back there in the blue, the person next to you. You. Yeah. Hi.
Why does it not matter?
So what is going on in the 8th century in Athens to effect this linkage that we see between the story of the funeral as it's recounted in Iliad 23 and actual burials of the upper class? And one possible response provided down here was that people are learning how to write. Why is that not pertinent? So why is the comment about, or the speculation that learning how to write makes a difference, not pertinent? Because these were oral stories. Exactly, these were oral stories. So it doesn't matter that people are learning how to write. I mean, it's irrelevant. The stories are around anyway. So what's going on? What do you deduce? You with the long blonde hair.
I don't know, I thought that it was an oral tradition.
What about it?
Because it kept going throughout the ages where it breaking down.
But here's the thing. Oh, I love archaeology so much. This is so cool. It's like a big detective story. You need all the clues. Okay, so here's the thing. Yes, they had this oral tradition. Yes, it went down through the ages. Yes, that's true. But we can tell from the burials that in Athens, for example, nobody is copying that aspect of the tradition until the 8th century. But we know that that tradition is around from the Mycenaean period. In parts, might not be true, but parts of it, like all of where the palaces were, that seems to be true. And then in the 10th century at Lefkandi, well, that part of the story comes in then. So it's around, but we don't see evidence for linking it up yet until the 8th century. So any explanation you come up with has to account for that. It has to say, what's going on here now in the 8th century in Athens?
Is it pre-contact with people who remember the stories? Like maybe in Athens people forgot the story, but like people contacting remember that had contact with the story?
You know, it's possible to make that kind of argument. Oh, well, these people just hadn't heard about it. But Lefkandi is A, not very far away from Athens, but more precisely B, we know that these places are all in contact because, for example, almost all the pottery found at Lefkandi, the geometric pottery found in the graves, is Athenian. It's made in Athens. So these folks are in contact with each other. I suppose that it's possible, but you know, that is speculating. I mean, to say that the story changes, first of all, assumes that people are slavishly copying a script. And they're not exactly. There are still significant differences between the burial of Patroclus and this. The most significant difference is that you don't have some gigantic pyre and huge mound. You know, you have one grave. So they're just aspects of the story. Many, but still just some. So these upper class burials, these upper class people in Athens at this time are looking for ways to do two things. One is to pronounce themselves upper class, mark themselves that way, show off that they are wealthy, that they are of this certain class. And one of the ways they're doing it is by looking to the past. There are all sorts of ways to show that you're rich. That lady in the 9th century gets buried with 50 pots, those fantastic earrings, a faience necklace, etc., etc., etc. All sorts of stuff. She's rich, no doubt about it. She just shows that she's rich at her burial by having all that stuff, and she takes it all with her. End of story. In the 8th century, people are looking to distinguish themselves, these upper class, and this is one of the ways they're doing it. By linking up their funerals with the most heroic kind of funeral that anybody in this culture could know about. And that would be the funeral described in Iliad 23, which, as far as we know, up until now, is still an oral story. But the evidence of the Diplon Oinakoi not only tells us that there were funeral games in Athens, not only suggests another more specific linkage between the story in Iliad 23 and these sorts of funerals, but because there's writing on it, it tells us something amazing. It tells us that now these stories could, for the first time in the Greek world, be written down. And if you could read, you didn't need to hear the story from one of these traveling itinerant singers. And so the story could spread even more broadly, because a document can travel, more documents can travel faster and further than an individual person. Where did the Greeks learn how to do this? Where did they learn how to write? They haven't known how to write for 400 years, and they had that horrible linear B system. Very, very complicated, 90 some odd signs, and very confusing. And this is very simple, elegant alphabet. They learn from the Phoenicians. Who are the Phoenicians? I'll tell you. The Phoenicians are the people who live all the way over here. Here's Greece. Here's Phoenicia. Phoenicia is this coast of the Eastern Mediterranean. And the Phoenicians were traders. In fact, it is very, very probable that it was via Phoenician merchants that some of the wealthy goods from the east, like from Nimrud, made it to places here in the Greek world, because it was Phoenician merchants who picked stuff up and sold it. Now, that's an amazing statement. How do we know that the Greeks get their alphabet from the Phoenicians? I will prove it to you right now. Here we go. The Greeks weren't writing in the 11th and the 10th and the 9th centuries, but the Phoenicians were, and we have their inscriptions. Here's a Phoenician inscription from a sarcophagus found at the site of Byblos, which is about here. And it records that who the sarcophagus is for. And it's written in letters, what we would recognize as letters, as opposed to a syllabary. Linear B was a syllabary. A syllabary means that every single sign is not just one sound, but it's a consonant sound plus a vowel sound. So it would be like having the alphabet where the first 5 letters were ba, bi, bi, bo, and boo. And then, so you can see how that would multiply the number of signs you would have if you had a syllabary. But this is not a syllabary, it's an alphabet. So it's very quick and easy. Nobody in this room can remember learning the alphabet. You learned it so easily when you were little that it's as if you always knew it. So it's a very, very impressive technology, the alphabet. It was invented down in this region Actually, in the second millennium BC, we don't really need to go into the back history of that. But so here's a Phoenician inscription from the 10th century from Cyprus. Here's a Phoenician inscription. This is actually just the letters from the inscription, not the inscription itself, from the 9th century. And these kinds of pieces of evidence are what allows us to hook up the appearance of writing in the 8th century in Greece, because here are the things that are the same between the Phoenician alphabet and the Greek alphabet. Number one, the names of the letters. So, for example, the first two letters of the Phoenician alphabet are Aleph and Bet, and the first two letters of the Greek alphabet are Alpha and Beta, and so on and so on. So the names of the letters are the same. Number two, the forms of the letters are the same. So here's an alpha, a Greek alpha, and here's an aleph, Phoenician aleph. The order of the letters is the same. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, blah, blah, blah. That's Greek. Aleph, bet, gimel, daled, hey, vav, zayin, tet, tet, blah, blah, blah. That's Phoenician. So the names, the forms, and the order are all the same. So that's how we know. Now there is one quite significant difference between the two alphabets. There's actually two significant differences. One significant difference is that Phoenician reads from right to left, but Greek reads from left to right, like we do. We do because they did. So the Greeks swap out the order. And the Greeks do something that is turn some of the letters that are in the Phoenician alphabet into vowels, because there weren't any vowels per se in the Phoenician alphabet, and that made it inconvenient for the Greeks because they had vowel sounds. The Phoenicians had vowel sounds, they just didn't have symbols for them. So in the 8th century, from Phoenician merchants, in addition to trinkets and goods of various sorts, the Greeks relearn how to write. What's this site? What's this site? What's this? Yes, maybe it's Funeral Games, right? It's the stele from Gray Circle A at Mycenae, and this is the this is from Athens, right? All right. Answer this question. Talk to the person next to you. Go. I'm going to start calling on people in about 2 minutes. Move. Of the 4 settlements and societies from which these remains come, which 3 are the most similar and why? Which 3 are the most similar and why? I don't hear you guys talking. You guys are supposed to be talking to each other. You're not talking. You guys are supposed to be talking. Talk, talk, talk. Okay, what do you say?
So Athens, Lefkandi, and Mycenae are more similar because those were all based on burials, or those 3 things?
No, it's just a coincidence what remains we happen to have.
Okay.
You have to talk about the societies as we can figure out what they are based on the finds.
Maybe they were richer societies, like Mycenae people. or like you could, from what was buried in which?
Well, we don't have any evidence that in Mycenae in the 8th century there was any amount of money whatsoever.
Oh, I guess that makes sense.
8th, right.
Either one.
See, the problem with sitting out here all the way in the end is that you don't have anybody to talk to. But you could turn around and talk to them, they would talk to you. Now remember, I don't care what sort of remains come from them. I don't want an answer like, we have burials from this place, and that's what makes them so similar. It's just a coincidence what specific kinds of remains we have. Would you put that newspaper down right now? Thank you. All right, of the 4 settlements and societies from which these remains come, which 3 are the most similar and why? You got to yell. People in the back are not going to be able to hear you. The Diplano Inakui. So Athens, Lefkandi, and Mycenae. Athens, Lefkandi, and Mycenae. How many people said that those 3 were the most similar? Lots of you. That is so exciting. Raise your hand again. Wow, Nellie. Why? The wealth is individual. Here? All the wealth is in this one place. All the wealth is in this one place. I don't think that you can assume that I don't think you can assume that there's not some people living in here. There's no evidence that they aren't. Well, there's not really evidence for funeral games here. There's not evidence for games. I saw so many hands. Now all of a sudden it's like, why did I think that? I don't really.
There's no evidence for funeral games in the Tumba, but there's other stuff from 23 that was in there.
There's no evidence that there's funeral games, but there's other stuff from Iliad 23. Let's elaborate on that. Why did you think? Did you raise your hand? And why did you think that these were the 3 that were the most similar?
Well, because it seems that both Lefkandi and Mycenae both are bases on, or at least the Milan and Mycenae still a base of funeral games. Well, Lefkandi is also based on Iliad.
So, has relationship to the story of the funeral in Iliad 23, has relationship to the story in Iliad 23, has relationship to the story in Iliad 23. What's with this place? What do we know about the linkage of this place with the Mycenaean past? It's in its much smaller, more poverty-stricken way, it stands to the rest of its settlement. I just elaborate on what you said perfectly correctly. It stands to the rest of its settlement as a palatial megaron stands to the rest of its settlement. In other words, these people continue this way of life. So you could say that all of them are linked to the Mycenaean world, couldn't you? What makes these 3 different than this? If all of them are linked to the Mycenaean world, what makes this one different? But wealth is just a relative thing. So this is a poor community at this time. There's hardly anybody living here. This is a poor community. This is a wealthy community. This is a wealthy community. A place can be poor or rich, but that in and of itself doesn't tell you how people organize the way they live together.
Well, the thing in Victoria, the only real big relation I can see is the kind of like Megarod, kind of mimicking it, but it doesn't really have anything to do with the Iliad.
Why doesn't it have it? So the point is, well, all right, so granted that this is similar in the way it works to a Megaron of the Mycenaean period, but didn't we think that the Iliad was about the Mycenaean period?
It shows the change in culture besides just like keeping up with the whole idea of having a central hub. And
What's the change? What's the change? Shows a change in culture. What's the change? But we said that these three are similar, and the burials in the tomb are nothing like any burials here, which are poor actually, and here. The settlement, the society, the people who lived in the tiny, run-down village on the citadel at Mycenae in the geometric period, maybe they put this up. That settlement, and this settlement, these three societies, we are saying are different than this. All four have some connection to the Mycenaean past. The difference is how that connection works for each of these groups. How does the connection to the Mycenaean past work for this group? How does it work in the society? Why is this similar? What's the nature of this similarity? Who are these people? They're probably survivors. That's my stomach growling. I bet the microphone picks it up. These people are survivors. These people continue in a much, much poorer and reduced way the same way of life, the same attitude. There's one big man. He's the chief. He has the main house. He has all the goods. There are plenty of important people in these societies. There are more stelae than this at Mycenae. No one person is the focal point, the religious, administrative, legal entity of his settlement. These people are survivors. These people hear the story. There's no evidence that these people are the survivors or these, because there are gaps in occupation. Remember your chart? You want to know where occupation continues and where it doesn't. And that's not just a box that you fill in or you leave blank. That's meaningful. It means that when you start to think about the people who suddenly fill up one of those boxes, if there's no link to the past, then you can't just ignore that evidence. You can't just ignore it. It has to play into however else you continue to explain. Okay, we got 5 minutes to get to our next spot. Here's our next spot. It's on the island of Andros in the Greek Aegean. Very nice spot. Very rugged place, surrounded, of course, by water. So it's a little island. And on this headland here was discovered a geometric period town, a whole town. Woo! This is good. This is good because we haven't had a town, so this is exciting. Well, we had Nicoria. That's not true. We had Nicoria. So here we have this whole town on this headland. And a lot of it has been excavated. So here's an area of housing. What is different? Yes? Oh, thank you very much for asking that. That will be the subject of about the 4th or 5th slide, which we may or may not get to today. So you are going to need to remember to want to know that so that you can ask it next time. What impresses you about this plan of this town? The only other town plan that you've seen and heard about is Nicoria.
All the buildings.
It's dense, meaning
all the houses are pushed up against one another.
all the houses are pushed up against one another. Was that what you were going to say?
Yeah, they're all connected.
They're all connected, party walls. So they had to have been built together. The houses had to have been built together. Most of the houses have a very similar plan. Here's a reconstruction of one of them, but you can see, and again, you have a reading about this, so you've got the plan in your course pack. If you look at any set of units, you can see similarities to this question.
Why is it that to all the houses have been built together? Couldn't you just use the outside wall of one house to be the inside wall of another?
You could. Just because you see it, yes, you're right. Just because you see it that way in plan doesn't necessarily mean they were all built together. The walls bond. So one wall doesn't just abut to another, but the walls actually bond. That's how we know. Excellent question. Very standard thing that archaeologists look at the second they see two walls. That's the first thing we want to know. Do they abut or do they bond? All right. So here is one house. One house. Room in the corner where lots of large jars stood, embedded in a kind of set of stands. Probably they held water. There's no spring up here on the headland. You would have had to go all the way down to the bottom of the headland by this very tortuous path, let me tell you, because I scrambled my way down it when I visited Zagora, to get to the source of water. So this was surely where water was stored in the house. You entered, there was an open courtyard. There was a little pen in one corner, probably for animals, and then a living area. What strikes you about this, which is typical of the houses at Zagora? What's the big difference between this and Nicoria? What size were the houses in the settlement at Nicoria? How small? How many rooms? Just one. One room. Single rooms, sort of spread out along. Inside the houses, lots and lots of cooking vessels. Inside all of the houses, so everybody has their own storage, everybody has their own animal pen, everybody has cooking vessels. What are these? They are not astragaloi. Very good. They are spindle whorls. All right, so in every house, everything you need to live, to make cloth, you have your own water storage, you have your cooking vessels. The houses are all connected to each other, but every house, which is pretty spacious, has all of the accoutrements it needs. Okay, so there's already lots of differences between this place and Nicoria. You will want to reflect on that and we will pick this up and move it along next time.